Most people knew Naomi Judd as one half of the most beloved mother-daughter duo in country music. 14 #1 hits, 5 Grammys. A story that looked almost perfect from the outside, but it was never the full picture. Behind the matching outfits and the warm smiles was a life shaped by secrets, survival, and pain almost no one was allowed to see. And now, years after her death, something has surfaced that nobody saw coming. A sealed envelope, a hidden tape, a voice from decades ago. What it reveals changes everything. This is the story they tried to keep quiet. The cruelest 24 hours in country music history. April 30th, 2022. That was the day one of the most celebrated women in country music died by suicide at her home in Tennessee. Naomi Judd was 76 years old. By that point, she had already survived poverty, teenage pregnancy, hepatitis C, psychiatric hospitalizations, and years of pain that most people around her could not fully see. Then came the next day. On May 1st, 2022, Naomi Judd's name was placed in the Country Music Hall of Fame. So the highest honor of her career arrived only one day after the end of her life. That timing still feels impossible to take in. What should have been a joyful milestone became something far heavier, and that one day changed the meaning of everything around it. At the induction ceremony, Country Music Hall of Fame CEO Kyle Young said what everyone in the room was already feeling. A moment that should have been full of celebration had become something shaped by grief. Still, as this story unfolds, what becomes clear is that the glory and the suffering were always living side by side. They had been moving together for years, and in that final weekend, they met in the most painful way possible. Who Naomi really was. The first surprise in this story is simple. Her name was not Naomi. She was born Diana Ellen Judd on January 11, 1946, in Ashland, Kentucky. Her father, Charles Glenn Judd, owned a gas station, and her mother held the household together with sheer determination. The family was not rich, and life was never especially easy. Still, the place she came from mattered. Eastern Kentucky gave her a strong sense of identity, and it also taught her early that survival often depends on how much pain a person can carry without letting it show. As Diana grew older, life moved quickly. She fell in love as a teenager and became pregnant at 17. The boy was a classmate named Charles Jordan, and he did not stay. While she was already expecting, she married Michael Simonella, and for years the public was told that he was the father of her first daughter, Christina Clare, who was born on May 30th, 1964. That daughter would later become known to the world as Wynonna. The truth about Wynonna's biological father remained hidden for decades, and that secret would stay inside the family story far longer than anyone outside realized. Around the same time, another deep wound opened. In 1965, Diana's brother Brian died of leukemia at just 17 years old. She was only 19. Loss at that age does something lasting. It changes the way a person sees the future. For a young woman already learning that life could turn hard without warning, the death of her brother would have settled into her in a way that never fully left. Years later, after divorcing Michael Simonella in 1972, Diana found herself in California as a single mother of 2. She lived on food stamps, worked whatever jobs she could find, and pushed herself through nursing school. Then, in the middle of those difficult years, she made a choice that reveals a lot about the person she was becoming. She changed her name. Diana became Naomi. That choice had meaning. In the Bible, Naomi is a woman marked by loss, survival, and the struggle to begin again. She is a woman who has suffered deeply and still keeps moving. Diana Judd saw herself in that story. Long before a record deal, long before the spotlight, she was already shaping the version of herself the world would one day meet. She built that identity with intention. She did not wait for someone else to define her. That matters, because so much of Naomi Judd's life was built around story. She understood image early. She understood presentation. She understood what had to be hidden, what had to be protected, and what had to be turned into something beautiful enough for the world to believe in. The nurse who conned her way into Nashville. This is where the story starts to feel almost unreal, because the path into country music should not have worked. Naomi studied nursing at Eastern Kentucky University and later finished her degree at the College of Marin in California. She did all of that while raising 2 daughters on her own. There was no family fortune waiting in the background. There was no safety net. There was work, pressure, and the constant need to make things hold together. By 1979, she was living in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside Nashville. She was working as a registered nurse at a local hospital, and during that same period, she and Winona, who was still a teenager, were quietly performing together in small places. They called themselves the Judds. Even that name carried a kind of construction. Both mother and daughter were stepping into identities they had chosen. Then came the break that changed everything. It did not happen through some polished industry route. It happened through the hospital. One of Naomi's patients had connections in the music business, and Naomi used that connection to get an audition with RCA Records. When you hear it now, it sounds almost too perfect for a movie. Yet, that is exactly what happened. A nurse used a patient connection to get a shot for her act, and that shot turned into a recording contract. RCA signed the Judds in 1983. At that point, Naomi was already in her late 30s, and Winona was a young singer with a remarkable voice, but no music industry background. By every usual standard, they looked like a gamble. Still, the label saw something special, and audiences soon saw it too. Winona had a voice that could stop a room cold. It was huge, emotional, and raw in a way that felt immediate. Naomi brought something different. She had instinct. She knew how to guide a moment, shape a room, and hold attention. For years, she had been performing in another way, through survival itself, through the need to look steady even when life was not steady at all. By the time she stepped onto a stage, she already knew how to make people believe. During all of this, Ashley Judd was watching from the edge of the picture. She was not part of the act. She was not inside the duo that America was beginning to fall in love with. She was the younger daughter standing just outside the main frame, and that position would matter more as the years went on. Even in the early days, Winona sensed that something underneath the dream was more complicated than it looked. She did not yet have the words for it, but she could feel it. The magic was real. So were the cracks. 14 number ones and the mother-daughter machine that ran America's heart. Once the Judds broke through, they did not just have a hit. They built a run that defined an era. They scored 14 number 1 hits. They won 5 Grammy Awards. They took home 5 CMA Awards for Vocal Group of the Year, along with 2 for Single of the Year and 1 for Album of the Year. Their debut album, Why Not Me, came out in 1984 and went straight to the top of the country album chart. Then the hits kept coming. Mama, He's Crazy became their first number 1 in 1985. After that came Girls' Night Out, Why Not Me, and Grandpa, Tell Me About the Good Old Days, which earned them a Grammy. Then came one of the defining songs of their career, Love Can Build a Bridge. Naomi co-wrote it with John Jarvis and Paul Overstreet, and the song won 2 Grammys, including Best Country Song. It became the track people tied most closely to the Judds, and years later, It was the song Brandi Carlile was supposed to perform at the Hall of Fame induction that became a memorial instead of a celebration. This success did not come from luck. It lasted through the decade because people believed what they were seeing. The bond felt real. The act felt intimate. The image reached people because it seemed to carry genuine warmth. And some of that warmth truly was real. One detail says a lot. Even at the height of their fame, before each performance, Winona would do Naomi's hair. Naomi would do Winona's too. It was not handed off to a stylist. It stayed between them. That small ritual gave the public exactly what it wanted to believe, that this was more than an act, more than branding, more than a polished duo with great songs. It felt personal because, in many ways, it was. Their fame also stretched far beyond country radio. The Judds appeared several times on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Years later, Oprah attended Naomi's memorial and spoke about the many conversations they had shared over the years. When a figure like Oprah shows up to honor you, that says something larger about your place in American culture. Naomi was no longer simply part of a successful duo. She had become part of the wider emotional life of the country. Still, even in the middle of all that love, a deeper tension remained. Winona often spoke about the magic they felt on stage, yet she also hinted at something heavier. The closeness brought comfort, but it also brought pressure. The harmony gave them everything, and over time it demanded a great deal from both of them. The fairy tale had a back room nobody was allowed. Into the public story of the Judds was powerful because it felt clean and easy to understand. America saw a glamorous mother and daughter in matching outfits, singing about love, family, endurance, and hope. The story looked almost perfect. A single mother and her daughter had struggled, kept going, and reached the top together. That story was true. It just was not complete. One of the deepest hidden truths sat at the center of Winona's life. The man the public believed was her father was not her biological father. Her biological father, Charles Jordan, had left before she was born. Naomi kept that truth buried for years, and she did it with the same instinct that shaped much of her life. She believed in holding the structure together. She protected the version of events that seemed most survivable. That instinct shaped almost everything. The later documentary, Truth Be Told, explores this clearly. Naomi was the one building the family image. She shaped the public story, the closeness, the emotional tone, and even the rituals people came to associate with the Judds. She knew how to make the bond feel whole, because she had designed the story that surrounded it. Then there was Ashley. While Naomi and Winona were becoming stars, Ashley was growing up beside a phenomenon that did not include her in the same way. She was the daughter outside the duo, watching her mother and sister become famous together. That kind of position leaves a mark. It can create distance even inside love, and it can make a person feel unseen while standing very close to something the whole world is looking at. The tension inside the family was not simple hostility. It was more layered than that. The bond between Naomi and Winona held love, dependence, pride, need, and control all at once. Winona later spoke about how Naomi could become upset when she pushed back or expressed something outside the approved version of their relationship. That meant the closeness people loved was real, yet it also came with rules. So while audiences saw harmony, success, and warmth, the family itself was carrying secrets, uneven roles, and emotional patterns that had been built over many years. The next phase of Naomi's life did not create those issues. It simply exposed them more clearly. The illness that ended the music. In 1991, Naomi Judd stopped performing with the Judds. The reason given at the time was serious and direct. She had been diagnosed with hepatitis C, and she believed she had contracted it during her years as a nurse before the duo became famous. At the peak of the Judds' success, she was told she had about 3 years to live. That announcement ended the act almost overnight. Winona moved forward as a solo artist, and Naomi began fighting for her life. In time, she won that battle. By 1995, she was declared free of the disease. It was a documented recovery, and for many people it looked like another example of Naomi surviving something impossible. She returned for reunion tours and occasional performances, and for a while, it seemed that one terrible chapter had closed. Still, Naomi later made clear that another illness had already begun to shape her life in a very different way. Around 2010, she began slipping into a severe depression that she described as completely debilitating and life-threatening. This was not a passing stretch of sadness. This was a deep, clinical, treatment-resistant depression that led to psychiatric hospitalizations, constant medication changes, electroconvulsive shock treatments, and years of suicidal thoughts that she spoke about openly. She also wrote about PTSD, disabling panic attacks, and childhood trauma, including sexual abuse that she had carried for a long time before publicly naming it. For nearly 3.5 years, she moved through psychiatric wards and rehabilitation, trying to find some path back to herself. In 2016, she published River of Time: My Descent into Depression and How I Emerged with Hope. She promoted the book widely. She appeared on major shows, spoke at events, partnered with NAMI, and became a visible advocate for mental health. She was trying to give language to suffering that many people still do not know how to speak about. That part is important because it helps explain something people often struggle to understand. Naomi could genuinely speak about hope and still remain in a fight that had not ended. She could help others and still be in danger herself. She could have better periods and still be facing an illness that was always there in the background. That is often how treatment-resistant depression works. It does not move in a neat line. It changes shape. It eases. It returns. It wears people down over time. After Naomi's death, Ashley and Winona wrote that the family had been beside themselves trying to get her help in the final months. They tried. That does not erase what happened, but it matters. April 30th, 2022, the day everything stopped. On the morning of April 30th, 2022, Ashley Judd went to visit her mother's home in Leiper's Fork, Tennessee, as part of her regular daily routine. That was the morning she found her mother. Ashley tried to help, and she remained with Naomi as she died. Later, Ashley wrote that the trauma of discovering her mother and holding her during those final moments continued to haunt her nights. She wrote those words while fighting to keep records from that day private, and that fight would soon become one of the most important public chapters after Naomi's death. 2 weeks later, Ashley appeared with Diane Sawyer on Good Morning America. She explained that Winona was not ready to speak, and that the family had asked Ashley to address how their mother died, because they knew the story would come out in some form. Through tears, Ashley said that Naomi had used a weapon, and that the weapon was a firearm. She said the family was deeply uncomfortable sharing that information, but they believed someone else would reveal it if they did not. The next day, May 1st, 2022, Ashley and Winona walked onto the stage at the Country Music Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Ashley carried the plaque. Winona performed. The ceremony that should have honored a lifetime of achievement now unfolded under the shadow of a loss that was still fresh and almost impossible to speak through. During that moment, Ashley said plainly that she was sorry her mother could not hold on for one more day. That line has stayed with people for a reason. It captures the unbearable closeness between the ending and the honor that followed it. If you are struggling right now, call or text 988. Help is available. Naomi Judd spent years speaking openly about mental illness because she wanted people to reach for support before it was too late. That part of her story matters just as much as the music. The will that stunned everyone. In August 2022, another shock followed. NBC News obtained a copy of Naomi Judd's will, and the details spread quickly. The will named her husband of 33 years, Larry Strickland, as the sole executor of her estate, which was reported to be worth around $25 million. Much of that value came from the continuing royalties generated by the Judds' music through streaming, radio play, and licensing. What stunned people was that neither Winona nor Ashley was named in the will. Larry Strickland was given full authority and discretion over the estate. He had the power to sell, lease, and manage property and assets without needing approval from a court or a beneficiary. If he could not serve in that role, the will named Reginald Strickland and estate executive Daniel Chris Wyatter as co-executors. This was not a mistake. It was deliberate and carefully drafted. As expected, the public reacted fast. People speculated about conflict, punishment, bitterness, or private fractures inside the family. Then, in October 2022, Winona offered a calmer explanation. She said there was no fight between her and Ashley about the estate and explained that she and Ashley would split it after Larry Strickland's death. She presented the arrangement as a way of protecting the estate during his lifetime. That explanation makes sense in practical terms. Large estates with valuable music catalogs are often handled through more layered structures. Royalties, trusts, and long-term financial protections can all shape how a will is written. Both Winona and Ashley are successful adults with their own careers and financial independence, so their absence from the document does not automatically mean exclusion. Even so, there is still something emotionally powerful about the choice Naomi made. She spent her whole life controlling narrative, image, and access. A will is also a final act of control. It is one more way of deciding who gets to hold the keys after you are gone. The secret war to seal her final moments. As questions about the will were still spreading, another legal fight had already begun. In August 2022, the Judd family filed a petition in Williamson County Chancery Court asking for all police investigative records from April 30th to remain private. That request covered body camera footage from inside the home, audio from interviews with family members, photographs, and written records. Their argument was straightforward and deeply human. Releasing that material, they said, would cause significant trauma and irreparable harm. Larry Strickland said he did not know he was being recorded when police spoke with him. Ashley later described sitting through 4 police interviews on the very day she found her mother, while still in clinical shock, and answering questions without realizing that her raw grief could later become public record. On August 31, 2022, Williamson County Chancellor Joseph A. Woodruff ruled against the family. He said the records did not fall under any existing exception to Tennessee's public records law. He also specifically identified body camera footage from inside the home as public record. The family appealed directly to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Then, on September 29, 2022, the High Court vacated Woodruff's ruling. The court did not hand the family a full victory, but it did say the earlier ruling had gone too far, too fast, and that the matter required a more complete hearing before individual records could be declared public. Ashley then turned the issue into something bigger than her own family's crisis. In a New York Times essay titled "The Right to Keep Private Pain Private," she argued that families dealing with suicide should not have their worst moments exposed through public records requests. She promised to make that issue part of her personal mission, and the family later supported Tennessee Senate Bill 009, which aimed to restrict access to law enforcement records connected to non-criminal death investigations. In the end, the legal battle did not close with some dramatic courtroom win. It ended more quietly. The family eventually moved to dismiss the lawsuit after journalists and media outlets seeking the records agreed not to pursue the photos and body camera footage from inside the home. A compromise ended the fight, but Ashley kept pushing for broader legal change because by then, the issue had become larger than Naomi Judd alone. The cassette in the envelope. In May 2025, Lifetime aired a 4-part documentary called The Judd Family, Truth Be Told. It was directed by Alexandra Dean, whose earlier work included Secrets of Playboy and This Is Paris. The project was made with the estate's cooperation and included extended interviews with Winona, Ashley, Larry Strickland, Reba McEntire, and longtime collaborator Don Potter. The purpose of the documentary was clear. It was trying to tell the truth about a family that had spent decades carefully managing what truth looked like in public. Then came the discovery that gave the documentary its emotional center. After Naomi's death, her manager Cody Chandler was going through her belongings when he found a sealed envelope. It had never been opened since October 24, 1982, the date Naomi had written on it herself. Inside was a cassette tape. On that tape were 13 original songs recorded in Naomi's voice and the young voice of Winona. Naomi had written them at the very beginning of their story, before the fame, before the first album, before any deal had changed their lives. In the documentary, Chandler becomes the first person to hear that tape since it was recorded. He presses play and hears Naomi introduce herself by date. Then the music begins. One of the songs is called "Daddy, Are You Coming Home Tonight?" That title alone carries enormous weight. It was a song about waiting for a father who was absent. It came from a woman who later became famous for building a public image centered on family, warmth, and connection, while privately carrying old wounds that never fully disappeared. There were also voicemails, personal messages the Judd women had left for each other over the years. These were not public performances. They were not designed for an audience. They were private traces of the relationship beneath the image. In one of the documentary's most emotional moments, Winona and Ashley listen to the tape together on camera. They hear their mother's young voice 43 years after she sealed it away, untouched through all that came later. It survived the hepatitis diagnosis, the recovery, the depression, the memoir, the advocacy work, and the final stretch of her life. Why did Naomi seal the tape and leave it hidden? No one knows for certain. Maybe she felt it was too personal. Maybe she thought it was not good enough. Maybe she meant to return to it and simply never did. Whatever the reason, the tape remained there in silence until after her death, almost like a part of herself she could not yet bear to share. And maybe that is the clearest final picture of who Naomi Judd really was. Under the chosen name, under the carefully built image, under the fame and the myth and the strength the world saw, there was still a woman who wrote, "Daddy, Are You Coming Home Tonight?" in 1982, sealed it in an envelope, and left it there for decades. Then, after everything, her voice came back.